It was the quiet that unsettled Michael the most. In the sleek apartment they shared in the heart of the city, the usual sounds of their lives, her humming while packing, the soft rustle of fabric, the clink of dishes, were replaced by a heavy silence. Claire stood near the bedroom window, folding clothes with mechanical precision, her gaze fixed on the horizon though nothing lay beyond the window but the neighboring building. Michael stirred his coffee slowly, his thoughts tangled. His voice finally broke the silence. "You've never said much about Willow Hollow." Claire glanced at him briefly. "There's not much to say," she replied with a brittle smile. "It wasn't the easiest place to grow up." He studied her face, strong, serene, and somehow distant. The woman he married 2 years ago was gentle, thoughtful, and always seemed so at ease with the world. And yet, in that moment, she seemed like someone holding her breath. They were headed to her hometown for a family celebration, her cousin's wedding, the first time Claire had agreed to return since she left. Michael was curious, but more than that, he was puzzled by her hesitation. "I just don't want to make a big deal out of it," Claire added quietly, zipping up the suitcase. But Michael felt it. There was a weight she was trying to carry alone. The drive out of the city was a scenic descent into memory. The highways gave way to narrow roads, thick with whispering trees and hills that rose like sleeping giants on either side. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting everything in golden hues when they finally entered Willow Hollow, a town that looked as if time had paused somewhere around 1985. Claire visibly straightened in the passenger seat as they drove through. She pointed out buildings and side roads with nostalgic warmth, the library where she'd spent weekends, the diner with the best cherry pie, the town square where they used to have summer dances. Michael smiled, charmed by her excitement. But even as she spoke, he noticed how people on the sidewalks paused to watch their car pass. And when Claire rolled down the window to wave at an older man walking his dog, his face lit up like he was seeing royalty. They arrived at the bed and breakfast, a cozy old Victorian house draped in ivy and the scent of gardenias. The owner, a plump, rosy-cheeked woman named Marion, nearly dropped her tray of cookies when she saw Claire step out of the car. "My stars," Marion gasped, enveloping Claire in a hug that lasted longer than expected. "Claire Adams. Look at you. It's been what, 10 years?" "Close enough," Claire laughed, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "And this must be your husband," Marion said, turning to Michael with a twinkle in her eye. "We've heard so much about you." Michael blinked. "You have?" "Oh yes. Everyone's so happy she's back. This town remembers its own." Michael noticed the way Marion's eyes glistened when she looked at Claire. Like someone looking at a war hero. But why? That night, they walked through Willow Hollow's central square. The place was a postcard, wrought iron benches, glowing street lamps, children playing tag in the fading light. Claire seemed more relaxed, more herself, yet Michael couldn't ignore the way people looked at her. Not just with fondness. With reverence. "What did you do here?" he asked lightly, nudging her elbow. Claire laughed. "Oh, nothing worth talking about." But Michael had been married long enough to recognize deflection when he heard it. The next morning, they visited the town market, a charming blend of booths filled with fresh produce, handmade candles, and wool blankets. As they wandered between the stalls, a wiry older man selling leather belts looked up and froze. "Claire Adams," he said, stepping around his booth. "You look just like your mother did. Maybe even stronger." Claire blushed. "Hi, Mr. Dobbs." He turned to Michael and offered a calloused hand. "You married one of the toughest people this town's ever known, son. You're lucky." Michael chuckled politely but felt a rising tension in his chest. This wasn't the first strange comment. Later, as Claire chatted with the florist and sampled jams, Michael slipped away and struck up conversations of his own. A pattern began to emerge, one whispered name at a time. Claire had raised her siblings alone after her parents died in a car crash when she was just 16. She had worked full shifts at the town's berry farm while attending school full-time. She'd organized clothing drives, helped teach at the local preschool, and even petitioned the mayor for funding to fix the library's roof when she was only 17. "She saved us," one woman said simply. When everything fell apart, she kept going. Michael stood, stunned, in the shadow of his wife's past. Later that afternoon, they visited Claire's brothers. Matthew and Jeremy greeted her with tearful smiles and bear hugs, ushering her into a farmhouse that smelled of cornbread and wood smoke. The reunion was emotional, filled with laughter and inside jokes, but Michael hung back, observing. While Claire went to visit an old neighbor, Matthew poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat with Michael on the porch. "She gave up everything for us," Matthew said, staring out at the fields. "She could have gone off to college, moved away sooner. But she stayed. Kept us fed, got us through school." Michael listened, speechless. "Used to sleep in the barn some nights because she wanted us to have warm beds. Why didn't she ever tell me this?" Michael asked, mostly to himself. Matthew shrugged. "Claire's never been one to wear pain like a medal. She just kept moving forward." That night, back in the B&B room, Michael watched his wife brushing her hair in front of the mirror. Something in him had shifted. He had fallen in love with a quiet woman, a kind woman. But now, he saw something deeper, an iron will, wrapped in silk. A woman who had once carried the weight of an entire world on her shoulders and never asked for recognition. He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You've always told me you came from a small town," he whispered. "But you never told me you carried it." Claire met his eyes in the mirror, surprised. "It doesn't matter now. It matters to me," he said. "I thought I knew you. But now I see you." She smiled softly, and for the first time since they arrived, there was no weight in her gaze. Only peace. And Michael knew, this trip hadn't just been about returning to her past. It had been about him finally arriving in her truth. Willow Hollow awoke slowly the next morning, bathed in the golden hue of a rising sun. Mist hovered just above the ground as the church bell rang in the distance, the sound soft but resonant. The town moved like a memory, slow, warm, echoing something simpler, something that felt like it belonged to a time before cell phones and deadlines. Michael stood on the porch of the bed and breakfast, sipping his coffee. Claire was still inside getting ready for a brunch invitation from her former school teacher, but Michael needed air. He needed to think. The conversations from yesterday still echoed in his head, the vendor who had called Claire a savior, the market-goers who remembered her with such clarity and awe. These weren't just random small-town kindnesses. These were testaments. And he had known none of it. He took a walk alone through the town square, passing the weather-worn statue of a local war hero and the iron benches nestled beneath towering sycamores. His footsteps led him to the library, a modest, red brick building with white shutters and a faded storytime corner sign in the window. Inside, a woman in her 60s looked up from behind the circulation desk. "Well, now," she said, adjusting her glasses. "You must be Claire's husband." Michael blinked. "I am. I'm Gladys. Claire used to spend every spare minute in this place," she said, standing slowly and approaching him with a smile. "Did you know she ran the summer reading program here for 3 straight years while taking care of her brothers?" Michael shook his head. "She never told me." Gladys chuckled softly. "Of course she didn't. Claire's not the type to relive the hard stuff." Michael listened as Gladys told him about the night Claire came in at 7 p.m., her arms loaded with grocery bags and school books, asking if she could borrow a textbook on budgeting. Said she needed to figure out how to stretch $32 for a week to feed 3 people. She paused, then added, she was 16. Michael's throat tightened. That afternoon, he visited the diner Claire had mentioned the night before. He sat at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and struck up conversation with the man behind the grill, Joe, whose grease-stained apron had since 82 stitched into the corner. "Claire?" Joe said, leaning on the counter with one elbow. "Haven't seen her in a while. Your wife's got a backbone made of rebar and a heart made of butter. She worked here?" "Oh, yeah. Late shifts, weekends, sometimes even school nights when someone called out." He paused. "Never once complained. Always left the tips for her brother's school lunches." "She never told me any of this," Michael murmured. Joe leaned in. "That's 'cause she wasn't doing it for applause. That girl wasn't surviving. She was shielding, making sure those boys had everything they needed, even if it meant breaking herself." Later that evening, they visited Claire's old neighbor, Mrs. Dalrymple, a widow who lived in a small white house with a wraparound porch covered in hanging flower pots. Claire helped her set up for the wedding reception. Michael offered to run to the store for extra napkins. As he returned with the supplies, he caught the end of a conversation between the two women. "I still remember the night your father died," Mrs. Dalrymple said, squeezing Claire's hand gently. "You didn't cry in front of your brothers once. But I heard you, Claire. I heard you sobbing into your pillow." Claire smiled tightly. "They needed strength. I had to be that." Mrs. Dalrymple turned to Michael. "You're a lucky man. But you better see her. All of her." Michael nodded, humbled. "I'm learning," he whispered. When they returned to the inn, Claire was unusually quiet. She stood by the window, watching dusk settle over the town like a soft blanket. Michael sat beside her. "I talked to Joe. And Gladys. And a few others." Claire didn't turn around. "I figured you might. They told me things I can't stop thinking about." She exhaled slowly, like someone letting go of a weight she'd carried for years. "I didn't hide it to keep secrets from you. I just didn't want my pain to define me." Michael took her hand. "It doesn't. But your strength? It does. And it should." Claire finally met his gaze. "I didn't want to be a sad story." "You're not," he said gently. "You're the hero of one." The next day, the town gathered for the wedding. Claire's cousin beamed in her white dress, and the small chapel was adorned with sunflowers and blue ribbons. But Michael wasn't focused on the ceremony. He watched Claire, how she moved among the guests, how children clung to her, how elders lit up when she hugged them. He realized then that Claire wasn't just someone who grew up in Willow Hollow. She was a pillar of it. And she had never once brought that version of herself into their new life together. Not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't think it mattered. But it did. It changed everything. Later that evening, as they danced slowly under fairy lights strung between trees, Michael whispered, "When we get home, I want to learn to cook. For you. For us." Claire blinked. "You cook? I can learn," he grinned. "You fed your brothers on nothing but courage and casseroles. I think I owe you a few meals." She laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Maybe we can start with grilled cheese," she said. Michael kissed her hair. "Deal." That night, as the town quieted again, Michael sat in bed journaling, something Claire had once encouraged but he never found the discipline for. His entry was short. "She never told me because she didn't think she needed to. But I understand her now, better than ever. Her silence wasn't absence. It was survival. Her kindness wasn't simple. It was hard-earned. She didn't grow up in a town. She built it. And I will never again mistake quiet for smallness." The morning sky over Willow Hollow was soft and gray, the kind of light that made the world feel quiet and thoughtful. Michael and Claire had planned to visit her brothers that day, and as they packed a basket of homemade pastries from the inn's kitchen, Claire seemed lighter somehow, nervous, but open. Michael noticed it in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear as she handed him the jar of strawberry jam, the same way she had when they first met. But there was something new in her now, like she had let go of some invisible weight and was breathing just a bit easier. They drove out past the town center, turning onto a gravel road lined with tall oak trees. Birds darted overhead, and wildflowers bloomed defiantly along the edges of the fields. When they reached the farmhouse, two men were already standing outside. Matthew, the elder of the two, had the same sharp jawline and quiet focus as Claire. His younger brother, Jesse, wore a dusty ball cap and a lopsided grin. Both of them froze when they saw Claire step out of the car, but only for a second. Then came the rush of footsteps, hugs, laughter, and the kind of warmth that comes only from the people who knew you when the world was still hard. The house was simple but inviting. The walls bore the wear of time, slight cracks in the corners, a faded patch where a photo frame used to hang, but it breathed with love. Photos lined the mantel. Childhood drawings were still tacked to the fridge. And yet, it was what wasn't there that struck Michael most. There were no photos of their parents. No reminders of what had been lost. And maybe that was intentional. Claire excused herself to visit their old neighbor across the road. She promised to return shortly. Michael was left with Matthew and Jessie on the back porch, where lemonade and memories seemed to flow in equal measure. "She always told us we'd be okay," Jessie said, his voice soft. "Even when we weren't." Michael glanced at him. "How old were you when your parents passed?" "I was 9. Matthew was 11. Claire was 16. Matthew leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She was still in high school. But she made it work. She walked us to the bus every morning, worked afternoons at the farm, then stayed up late to finish homework. She cooked, cleaned, helped with our science projects. I don't think she ever slept. She used to cut her own clothes to patch ours," Jessie added, almost absently. "Wouldn't let us go to school with holes in our shirts. Said people could judge her, but not us." Michael felt something tighten in his chest. Every word from her brothers was like a puzzle piece clicking into place, revealing the full picture of a woman he was still learning to know. "She had a scholarship to a university 3 hours from here," Matthew said. "A full ride." "What happened?" Michael asked, though he already guessed. "She turned it down. Said we needed her more than she needed a diploma. Got a job as a full-time waitress instead. Then started teaching part-time at the town preschool. Said books could wait. Kids couldn't." Michael was silent for a long time. "She never mentioned any of this," he finally said, almost to himself. "Of course she didn't," Jessie said, shaking his head with a chuckle. "Claire doesn't carry her scars on her sleeve. She keeps them quiet. Wears them like armor." Matthew nodded. "But she carries them all the same." Claire returned as the sun crept lower in the sky, her cheeks pink from walking and eyes sparkling from the conversation she'd had with her old friend. When she saw the three of them sitting on the porch, she paused, just long enough to take it in. Her 2 brothers. Her husband. Together. And then she smiled. A real, full smile. Not forced, not polite, just honest. Later, back at the inn, Claire sat at the edge of the bed brushing her hair. Michael watched her for a long time. "I talked to your brothers," he said gently. She paused but didn't turn around. "I figured you would. Why didn't you tell me you gave up college? That you used to sleep in a barn so they could have real beds?" Claire set the brush down. "Because I didn't want you to look at me differently. I didn't want pity." Michael crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "I don't pity you. I admire you. More than I've ever admired anyone." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time since they arrived, he saw tears there, not from pain, but from release. "You carried so much," he whispered. "And you never let anyone see it. I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're the one who lifted everyone else. And you never even asked to be thanked." Claire took a shaky breath. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," he said. "But you still deserve it." He pulled her into an embrace, holding her as tightly as he could. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. They just breathed, together. That night, Michael wrote in his journal again, something he was now doing daily, thanks to Claire's quiet encouragement. "The weight she carried was invisible. But now that I see it, I can't unsee it. Her story isn't just one of struggle. It's one of triumph. Of quiet, everyday heroism. I used to think I married a gentlewoman from a small town. But what I really did was marry a warrior who never needed a battlefield to be brave." The next day, as they prepared to leave Willow Hollow, Michael stood in the doorway of the inn one last time and looked back at the town. The people. The stories. And he realized something. Claire didn't just come from this town. She shaped it. And now, he would carry her story with him, every day, gratefully, humbly, and with the kind of reverence she had never asked for, but had always deserved. The following afternoon was made of soft sun and high clouds, the kind of weather that invited people to pause, breathe, and just be. Claire had suggested a picnic by the stream she used to visit as a child, and Michael agreed instantly. He had seen so much of her world over the past few days, its weight, its texture, and he craved more. Not out of curiosity now, but out of reverence. They drove past cornfields and willow trees until they reached a clearing at the edge of a gentle brook. The water glided over smooth stones, whispering secrets only Claire seemed to understand. She walked ahead with a woven basket in hand, her sundress fluttering just above her ankles, the hair damp from morning dew still clinging to the grass. Michael followed in silence, blanket tucked under one arm. He watched her pause, take a breath, and close her eyes for a moment. She looked peaceful here. Rooted. "I used to come here to cry," she said quietly, not turning around. "When I couldn't cry at home." Michael stopped walking. The wind carried her words to him like the first verse of a song you didn't know you needed. "I'd sit by the water and just let it all out. This was my secret place. The only space where I didn't have to be strong." They settled near the stream under the shade of an old elm tree. The checkered blanket was spread out, and Claire unpacked their meal, fresh fruit, sandwiches, lemonade in mason jars. Everything felt simple, but charged with something deeper. Michael sat across from her, but leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Claire," he said, his voice measured, "can I ask you something?" She glanced up, wary but open. "Why didn't you ever tell me about what you went through? Your brothers? The sacrifices you made?" She took a slow sip of lemonade and looked at the water. The surface rippled, but beneath it, everything was still. "I guess," she said slowly, "I didn't want to be defined by pain." He didn't interrupt. She needed space to shape the truth. "I've spent so much of my life being the strong one. And not because I chose to, but because I had no choice. People kept looking at me to fix things, to hold it together, to not fall apart. And after a while, you start believing that if you do fall apart, everything will collapse with you." She looked at him now, eyes clearer than they'd been all trip. "When I met you, you didn't see a girl who'd been broken and stitched back together. You saw a woman who was calm and kind. And for once, I liked that version of myself. I wanted to protect it." Michael's voice was gentle. "You're still her. But knowing what shaped you only makes me admire you more." Claire smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know. It's just, sometimes it feels safer to let people love the clean, peaceful version of you. Not the one who slept in barns or rationed grocery money to stretch over 2 weeks." He moved closer, reaching for her hand. "I don't love the peaceful version instead of the other. I love her because of the other." Claire blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. "I didn't expect this trip to change anything," she admitted. "But it's changing me." "How?" She laughed softly. "I think I finally believe it's okay to be seen. To be fully seen." Michael squeezed her hand. "You're not just seen, Claire. You're honored." They ate in silence for a while. Birds sang in the canopy above. The stream kept flowing, like it always had. Like it would long after they left. Eventually, Claire leaned back on her elbows, looking up through the rustling leaves. "I used to lie here with my brothers," she said. "We didn't have money for outings or ice cream or even proper toys. So we'd come here. I'd make up stories. About castles and dragons. About a girl who wasn't afraid of anything." Michael smiled. "Were you that girl?" "I tried to be." "You still are." "No," she corrected gently. "Now I'm a woman who knows fear. And still chooses to show up anyway. That's stronger than being unafraid." He nodded slowly. "You're teaching me that. Every day." Later, as the sun began its slow descent behind the treetops, Michael reached into the basket and pulled out something he'd tucked in last minute, a small velvet box. Claire turned toward him, surprised. "I didn't plan this as a proposal," he said quickly. "We're already married. And I still stand by the ring I gave you. But this." He opened the box. Inside was a simple bracelet. A silver band engraved with the words, "You were never small." Claire's breath caught. "I had it made last week," he said. "Before I knew all of this. Funny how it means more now than it ever could have before." She reached out and touched the band with trembling fingers. Michael fastened it around her wrist. "No matter where you go, who you're with, what people see, you'll remember. You were never small. You were just quiet in your greatness." She leaned into him then, resting her head on his shoulder. And they sat that way until the sky turned pink. That night, back at the inn, Claire tucked the bracelet into the drawer beside her bed, right next to her journal. Michael watched her, and said softly, "What are you thinking?" I'm thinking that silence can be strength, she said. But sharing, being known, is freedom. In his journal that night, Michael wrote. Her silence wasn't absence. It was armor. Her past wasn't a burden. It was the foundation of her grace. She never needed rescuing. She was always the rescuer. And from now on, I will love her not just for her light, but for the battles she never asked to fight, but won anyway. The drive back to the city was quiet, not heavy, but thoughtful. Claire rested her head against the passenger window, watching fields roll past as if they were pages in a book she had finally finished reading. Michael kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently resting over her knee. They didn't speak much. Words had done their work. Now, silence was something shared, not avoided. When they crossed back into the familiar hum of traffic and high-rises, Michael glanced at her. You okay? Claire nodded. More than okay. Just different. He understood. They both were. Life returned to routine, but the rhythm had changed. At home, Claire began telling stories at the dinner table, small ones at first, like the time she'd sold handmade bookmarks at the Willow Hollow fair to buy her brother a second-hand bicycle. Or how she used to practice reading aloud so she wouldn't stutter when teaching Jessie how to pronounce chrysanthemum. Michael soaked in every word. One night, she surprised him by placing a framed photo on their mantel, her and her brothers as kids, muddy and grinning, sitting on an overturned wheelbarrow. I never used to display anything from back then, she admitted. But it's time. Michael smiled. That's my favorite photo in the whole house. The deeper change, though, was in Michael himself. He had always thought of love as something you express through gestures, flowers on a birthday, a well-timed back rub after a long day, surprise takeout from her favorite Thai place. But now he understood that real love wasn't just action. It was attention. Noticing. Honoring. He found himself listening more, not just to Claire, but to others. His co-workers. Strangers on the train. He began seeing people the way he had started seeing his wife, as layered, complicated stories that didn't always speak for themselves. One Saturday afternoon, while Claire was tutoring a student, Michael drove out to a jeweler tucked in a quiet corner of the city. He wasn't there for a ring. He was there for a commission. 3 weeks later, the piece was ready. He waited until they were curled up on the couch, Sunday rain tapping gently on the windows, before handing her a small velvet box. Another one? She laughed, surprised. He nodded. It's not jewelry, exactly. She opened it. Inside was a delicate silver pendant. On one side, it was engraved with the coordinates of Willow Hollow. On the other, it simply read, "You carried us all." Claire stared at it, blinking slowly. This is. Wow. It's from your brothers too, Michael said softly. They pitched in. Said it was time you wore something that reminded you of what you mean to them. She reached for his hand, eyes glassy. No one's ever done something like this for me. Well, he said with a smile, you've spent your whole life doing it for others. It's about time we caught up. That evening, Claire called Jessie and Matthew on speakerphone. When she told them about the pendant, there was a long silence on the line. Then Jessie said, "You've always been our hero, Claire. We just didn't say it enough." Matthew added, "You still are." Michael watched her as she smiled through her tears. He didn't interrupt. This was hers. Weeks passed, and life began to feel fuller, richer. One Friday night, as Claire packed her tote for another weekend volunteer teaching session, she looked over at Michael. "Do you think people can fall in love again? With the same person?" Michael looked up from the book in his hands. "I think," he said, standing and walking toward her, "that I fall in love with you every single day I get to know you more." She shook her head, smiling, and kissed him, softly, but with all the quiet fire of a woman who had rebuilt her life from ashes. It was months later, during a late autumn evening, that Claire received a letter in the mail. It was from Willow Hollow. Inside was a flyer for the town's annual Founders' Day celebration. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note from Marion, the innkeeper. Claire. "We're honoring community heroes this year. Your name came up. We know you might not want the spotlight, but we'd love for you to come home, just for one more night, and let us thank you." Claire held the letter close, thinking. She looked at Michael. "Should we go?" He took the letter from her hand, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Let's go thank the woman they thought they lost, but we all know never really left." They returned to Willow Hollow under a sky strewn with stars. This time, Claire didn't flinch when people greeted her. She didn't shrink back when Marion announced her name at the town square. She stood, accepting the bouquet and applause, not as a woman who once hid from her past, but as someone who now owned it. Michael stood beside her, clapping, pride radiating off of him like sunlight. And in that moment, he knew. He had fallen in love with a schoolteacher. But he had married a legend. That night, back in their room at the inn, Claire stepped onto the porch barefoot, watching fireflies dance under the moonlight. Michael followed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I always knew you were special," he murmured into her hair. "I just didn't know how special." She leaned back into him. "I'm still me." "Exactly," he said. "And that's why I'll never stop learning how to love you better." They stood like that in silence, surrounded by the town that once broke her, and then watched her rise. In his journal that night, Michael wrote, "She never asked for applause. Never asked to be understood. But once I truly saw her. I could not love her more. This woman who wore strength like silence. Who carried others before herself. Who taught me that gentleness isn't weakness. It's courage in its quietest form." Claire had once feared that her story would make her seem fragile. But what she learned, and what Michael would never forget, is that true strength rarely shouts. It simply stands. And Claire had stood taller than anyone ever knew.